Oh, good morning. It's a crisp November morning, 2023, and this is the inaugural podcast, Rooted in the Reserve, Montgomery County's agricultural reserve, which is about 93,000 acres in northwest and sweeping over to the east of Montgomery County, Maryland. We have an extraordinary number of tales to tell, fascinating people, places, history, future goals. And today, rightly, we start this podcast, and I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Caroline Taylor, Executive Director of Montgomery Countryside Alliance. I'm going to pass it over to my able coworker, Christina Bostic, to get us started with our two guests this morning.
Well, good morning. I want to thank our two guests for being here today for our inaugural podcast of Rooted in the Reserve. We have storytellers, writers, public historians, Lennon Gross and Christine Ray. Thank you both so much for being here. And we'd love to start off with how you came to the storytelling and interest in the Ag Reserve that you have.
Lennon, can I go first? Is that okay?
Absolutely. You tell the story best.
Okay. Thank you again for having us both. I would say probably the simplest version of this story about storytelling is that I just concluded the 5th year of leading the Haunted History Walking Tours for our local historical society, the Historic Medley District. And when I was initially putting together those tours, I reached out to the public as well as doing, traditional research, things that had already been documented. But I wanted to hear from people that live here, that work here, that grew up here, if they had had any personal encounters or had heard more informal stories that hadn't been yet recorded. And people were so generous with their experiences that there was really this outpouring of incredible tales. As you said, the name of the podcast, Rooted in the Reserve. So many of these stories couldn't take place anywhere else other than the Ag Reserve. And just doing those tours for a number of years, hearing from people, hey, you should write them down. Hey, you should put them in a book. So initially I was like, oh, I'll just do a book version of, the tours that I give, and that'll be that. But along the way, Lennon and I, who I'd known Lennon when Lennon was younger, we reconnected and we went on some site investigations together. And I just kind of spur of the moment one day at a local farm said, hey, I'm going to be writing a book about this stuff. Do you want to write it with me? And I think this really speaks to what a special person Lennon is, because I will tell you that I absolutely hate group work and always have. I'm a professor and I've been a teacher now for like 23 years. Even now, I will not assign like out of class group projects to students. Like, I really don't like it. So this really speaks to Lennon being an amazing person to work with and to really grow this project in a direction that it wouldn't have ever grown in if it had just remained that original vision.
It definitely has been a wild ride, and thank you all for having us, but also thank you, Christine, for bringing me on board as well, because it has been an amazing experience so far putting the book together. And I don't even think that it's going to be consigned to one book either. At this point, we're looking at multiple volumes so that we can do some deep dives into some of the stories that we've been able to uncover.
That is so fantastic. So what drew you first of all to this realm in terms of being interested in stories, and specifically being interested in maybe the more spooky side, paranormal aspect of stories?
Lennon, do you want to go first for this one?
Sure thing.
Or I can, whichever.
I'll jump right in on this one. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. As I mentioned a little bit, earlier, I am a paranormal investigator. And so I've always been fascinated by these types of stories. I think that it's incredibly interesting, not only from just a spooky perspective, but also from a sociocultural perspective, how ghost stories become part of the local ethos. This is something that I want to continue to explore beyond the reserve as well. But it's been an amazing opportunity to connect deeper with the history while being able to pinpoint tales that have been so influential for so many generations as well, because these stories really are passed down. And so a lot of it for me came from growing up on the agricultural reserve, because I did grow up in Poolesville. I'm no longer a resident. However, I do make frequent trips back for this project. That being said, there were always these places that I had so many questions about, or people said, oh, that's haunted. And you would think not every building in Poolesville can be haunted, but lo and behold, there are so many stories that abound. And sometimes I find that a haunting doesn't necessarily need to be true in order for there to be something important to uncover there, because usually the story points to something greater, and that greater story usually has something to do with the heartbeat of the town and how it was founded and where it's going in the future and how we got here. And it helps root you so much better in space and time, whether or not the story is true.
Absolutely. And if I can piggyback off of Lennon's excellent answer, I would say for me, this interest started as a kid. I grew up in northern Frederick County, out in the middle of nowhere. I like to say that where I grew up, Poolesville looks like Manhattan in comparison. And that really is not hyperbole. But one of my favorite books as a kid was Ghosts and Legends of Frederick County. And each little chapter tells a story from various locales around Frederick County. And I just remember being really attracted to the idea of something that on the surface looks like history, but is adding this additional human dimension, this additional like folkloric dimension, which I think is a little more organic and a little less restrained than sometimes the discipline of history traditionally has been. And I'm a really imaginative person and have always been. And I love how these types of stories really get your imagination going. As Lennon said, you know, are all of them true or not? Who knows? I mean, there's not a way to quantify these things. And I know in my ghost tours, and Lennon and I have discussed, and we feel the same way about this book, we're not putting forth any theories about this phenomena. We're not trying to like persuade someone to feel some kind of way or another about paranormal or activities and things like this. They're simply stories. And I think stories in themselves have so much value, for sure.
Absolutely. I so appreciate both of your answers to that, because it puts this in the context not of the supernatural, but of the natural world, of the human experience. And that is what is so fascinating. And also, you know, we are so grounded each day in the normal drill of work or school or whatever. There's everything just so regimented. The idea that there is mystery, that there is something that we don't have a grasp of, for me anyway, that's such an important driving force. And it's a driving force, as you said, for artistic expression as well. So thank you for learning about these stories and telling these stories. So go a little deeper and say, do either of you have one particular story that you think is really rooted in the reserve, or tells us something, you know, tease us with what's coming out in your book so we know.
Before we jump into that, can I just add one thing about this type of work, whether it's ghost tours or paranormal investigations or these collections of spooky folklore and such, is that I think another valuable facet of this type of stuff is that it draws people in that ordinarily would not be automatically excited by history or these types of things. So you can see younger people getting more interested. You can see people who come from all different walks of life and philosophies and such. I really like that it's a really democratic and accessible, form of storytelling and expression and history keeping. And one more thing, I said I was going to be quick, and now it's not being quick. Something Lennon and I discussed, which you kind of touched on, Caroline, is recognizing all the people that have lived in this corner of what is now Montgomery County is also an important part of this book project for us. So reaching back to the indigenous peoples that lived here for millennia, which, our current town here, Poolesville, and surrounding towns and such, so much of the infrastructure is built literally often upon their footprints and have largely gone unrecognized. So we want to make sure that they have a presence in the book, as well as, the African American communities that are so numerous here that sprung up, in and around the Civil War. It's important that they have representation as well, because traditionally they haven't. It's kind of been a footnote or an aside. As well as, all of the big history that's been a focus, like the C&O Canal, the Civil War, and all of those things. We don't want to demean that heritage either, but that's an important piece of this work.
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
back to the story.
Back to a story, because I'll have one in a minute too. Christina, I'm going to mention the haunted office. You probably. So what do you guys got? What can you tease us with?
I have a story. It's not as much supernatural at face value, but it is very much rooted in the reserve. So one of the contributors of stories to this book has been the astoundingly wonderful Glenn Wallace, who is on the board of directors for the Monocacy Cemetery. And one of the things that he talks about is coincidences and how they just happen extraordinarily often in Monocacy Cemetery. And one of the coincidences that he came across was that he was researching this particular grave, and there wasn't a lot of information about the grave, and the name on the headstone was actually just a nickname. Pardon me. And so he was looking through all of this information, and one of the genealogy resources that we have in the Agricultural Reserve is the Find a Grave website, which has been almost entirely populated by Glenn himself. So he has done an astounding amount of work to make this accessible. Truly, he does deserve a round of applause. And it's not only accessible to people within the reserve, but also without as well. And this is where the story comes into play. After weeks of research, he finally finds this woman and who she is. And 11 o'clock at night, as he's wrapping up his work for the night, he posts the Find a Grave entry. And there she is, just, up on the website. And the very next morning, he's out at the grave, and this car comes in, coming really, really slowly. And, usually when that happens, there's something going on. So he walks over and he says, "Hi, how can I help you?" And the woman says, "I was just on a whim checking last night on Find a Grave at 11 o'clock for this woman, almost the exact same moment that he pressed the post button." And she says, "I've been looking for this for years, and I finally found her. And here she is, just on the reserve." And she says, "Where can I find this grave?" So she steps out of the car, and she and Glenn are talking. And as they're having this exchange, they look down, and they are standing right over her gravestone. And so talk about rooted in the reserve, somebody who generations later is returning to an astounding coincidence. And it's funny how all of those things just seem to interlock. Some might call it fate, some might call it just chance encounters, but very interesting thing to have happened right here in Montgomery County Agricultural Reserve.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a wonderful cemetery as well. It dates back to 1700s, I think. Yeah.
It is one of the earliest cemeteries that was widely populated. A lot of the headstones have been transplanted from different farms across the reserve because the standard practice was to bury people on your homestead. So some of the gravestones that do date back that far were not original to Monocacy Cemetery, but it is one of the oldest and largest in the reserve.
I think that one of the chapel or something is very, very old. The original chapel anyway there. Yeah.
Well, that's not the original chapel, I should say, but the chapel building itself is also historical for sure. There's lots of layers of history there too.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Oh yeah,
Really, we
Oh,
could talk about Monocacy Cemetery for hours.
easily. You definitely have to have Glenn on. He's just an amazing and a lovely person to talk to. I'm sure you've encountered Glenn before, and just a wealth of knowledge and passion. He's amazing.
Perfect. Well, Christine, what you got for us?
Woo boy. I know Lennon probably knows which one I'm going to say. And this is actually my introduction to the paranormal side, whatever label you want to give it, of the Ag Reserve. As I said, I grew up in Northern Frederick County. When I was done, with community college and such, I transferred out and lived in Baltimore for like 10 years. And when I was living in Baltimore, I met my husband, Alexander, who grew up here in Poolesville. And we were talking one evening, and he told me this story where when he was a teen, he and a friend, late summer, you're getting bored, it's hot, you don't really want to admit you're ready to go back to school, but you're kind of tired of the summer, lack of structure and such. So they're just riding around on their bikes on all the back roads, and they come to this crossroads. And as they're stopping in the middle of the road, it's a rustic road. There's no traffic. They're just kind of going, you want to keep going? You want to head back to town? And when they look up, they had this very strange exchange, which I'm truncating this story considerably. But basically the gist of it is this man appeared in the road who wasn't wearing shoes. His feet were muddy. He's wearing work clothes. It was August. It was hot. It was dry. How he had muddy feet was a mystery. He had these whited out eyes that were just kind of staring ahead sightlessly, this older African-American man. And they're like, whoa, where'd this guy come from? And then in his place was a dog, like an old German Shepherd with a gray muzzle, and the dog had muddy paws. And there's some other details to the story. They're like, whoa, where'd the man go? Where'd the dog come from? That dog looked sick. The dog had whited out eyes. And they're like, let's get out of here. So, but all he did and all the dog did was just stand there and watch. And I was like, wow, that's quite a story. There's some other things that happened at that site I won't get into. But as years went on and we came back and moved to Poolesville when we started a family, and I've lived here now for 16 years, we started encountering other people who had seen the same person, though not the dog version, in various places around the Ag Reserve. So off of Jerusalem Church Road, on the Isaac Walton League property. A lot of people have said that they have seen him around just various fields, different places in this northwestern corner of the Ag Reserve. And it's always the same. He's looking the same and just doesn't really react, is just staring ahead and watching. So I kind of christened him as the Watcher. We're very curious who he might be, what his connection was, because he seems to be rooted in the reserve here and seems to be a protective figure. He's not, he's startling, sure, because where's this man appearing from suddenly? But he's not scary or threatening. And Lennon did an amazing illustration of the Watcher, which was featured in Bethesda Magazine last month, and which we will also have in our book.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up. Well, those are some good teasers to your upcoming book. And when will your book be made available? Do you think it'll be done?
It's a little hard for us because there's so much material and because we both enjoy researching so much, but we are looking to have a complete draft and locating a publisher next year. We already have, I think, 6 or 7 chapters drafted, and a lot of pages of notes.
For our listeners, or watchers, the other watchers, would you be soliciting more stories? Okay, well,
Always.
hear that you are offered the opportunity to share your story. I'll share a quick one. My coworker and I were very excited to be offered up office space in an estate on Big Woods Road, which is a rustic road in the reserve. And I'm really eager to get in there. My daughter and I, and she was, oh, I don't know, maybe 8 at the time, I can't remember, but we decided we were going to go one evening and start bringing things there. And we had been told that it was haunted, but I hear that a lot. And I take it as a bit of a dare anyway. So we showed up, it was just about fully dark. And we entered our space was going to be in the sort of basement, walkout basement space. As soon as we came in and put something down, we hear through the walls, and no one was supposed to be in the house, a woman screaming. And so we were out of there. I think we moved super quick. I decided to ask some more questions about the nature of the supposed haunting. And what I heard was that the property was purchased by the Saudi ambassador, Prince Bandar, some years previously, and that upon coming, his entourage taking, housing in, coming to the place to live, they found it to be haunted. They didn't describe what happened, but they all fled the building. So for various reasons, wasn't it Christina, they were selling the property, we ended up leaving that property anyway, but you were there.
There were the black rat snakes that climbed the walls as well.
Yeah, the walls had snakes on them, which is not necessarily supernatural, but it's certainly not pleasant in your office.
Yeah, those won't hurt you unless you're a rat, but yeah, it wasn't conducive to getting work done, really.
No, after the screaming incident, which someone tried to explain away, saying the wind was blowing through the chimney flue or something, but I got to tell you, it definitely sounded like a woman screaming. There had been the people who built the house, the man had died in a fiery motorcycle accident, apparently, and hadn't even been able to live in the house. So there was some theory that resulted in whatever was going on in that place. But and subsequently that house is burnt down. Yeah.
Oh, I know that house.
And they said it was because of the snakes too, which is funny.
Snakes, they burnt down the house. So there you go. It was pretty
They
weird.
don't proof papers and they commit arson. Those dang snakes.
Right. So there's my rooted in the reserve ghost story. So, well, I am so looking forward to the book, but you also you come and speak at various venues. We'll make sure that people hear where these are going to be, when they're going to be. And I'm just thrilled that you all are doing what you're doing, because these stories connect us to people and to place and to history and to purpose. And so thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much.
Any parting words? You want us to always look for the mysterious, or
Look for the history that inspires you. If it's the mysterious history, amazing. If it's the mundane history, if it's the architectural history, just dig deeper. Look for that spark that makes you go, huh? And ask further questions.
Yeah, need more, definitely. Christine.
I'd welcome people, please, we have a Facebook group. Please join our Facebook group. We also have a project email. Even if somebody has a small experience, or it's through hearsay, even if it's not spooky haunted stuff, if it's hidden history, we've been looking into the Underground Railroad and a potential Quaker community out here, some things that have been lost to time. We'd love to hear from people. And I would just say, let all of this, fill yourself with wonder and delight and imagination, as Caroline was saying, sort of an antidote to the daily grind, and also let it inspire you to be a good caretaker of the Ag Reserve. Its history, its landscapes and ecosystems, its people, past and present and future.
Thank you both so much. Off we go to the day ahead. And Christina, thank you.
We will link all the resources you guys have discussed here down below in the description of this video. And we just want to thank you both so much again for being our inaugural episode of Rooted in the Ag Reserve. Thank you guys so much.